You're listening to The Secret Society of Western Big Game Hunting with Dan Adler.
Welcome back to my speakeasy here in Prescott, Arizona. You know, if you've ever picked up a hunting magazine, if you've ever turned on an outdoor television show, or cared at all about wildlife conservation like I know you do, well, in the last 40 years, there's only one name that comes to my mind, and he's my guest today, and most of us know him well. He's known around the world as Mr. Whitetail. He's a professional wildlife biologist who's managed over 15 million acres of habitat. He's the co-founder of the Texas Wildlife Association, an organization that literally changed the landscape of private land conservation in Texas. He's a professional member of Boone and Crockett Club, an author of multiple books, including Deer Addictions. He's hosted more award-winning outdoor television than almost anyone alive, including Trailing the Hunter's Moon. Candidly, though, all those titles don't tell the real story. The real story is that he's one of the finest, most ethical, and most knowledgeable hunters to ever walk into the brush. He's hunted all over the globe, from South Texas to the plains of Africa, and he's done a lot of it with a single-shot handgun. He's a legend, he's a gentleman, he's a battle buddy to me. He represents the core values of what hunting is supposed to be. Larry Weishuhn, welcome to the Secret Society of Western Big Game Hunting.
Oh my gosh, I am so truly honored and humbled by that introduction. My gracious. Now I'm going to have to do my best to live up to everything you say.
Well, it's so great to have you. We're talking off air a little bit about, I remember fondly the first time I met you, but there's two things that stand out to me about your leadership. And, our podcast, we talk about a little bit about hunting, a lot about life. And I think they're intertwined. And I talk about that for a couple reasons. One, from a leadership perspective. I've been going to the Dallas Safari Club, for example, for almost 20 years. And I can't think of very many days, if there are any, Larry, where every breakfast you weren't out there shaking hands, meeting people, thanking both guests and exhibitors for their business, for being there. You've been so upfront with that. You've always been so kind and gracious to me. I know we share the Coues deer amongst whitetail in common, especially the Coues deer in common. We're both big fans of those that come before us when it comes to Coues deer and riding. And also, when you first came, the first time you ever came to my Coues deer hunting seminar, I was talking a little bit about, I was so glad I didn't know the night before you were coming, because I would have just been really nervous. So we just popped up, and I know we share Jack O'Connor in common, a lot of different things. And you've just always been out front with everything you've done. And I feel like it's who you are. We talk about a little bit about hunting, a lot about life, because it's bigger than hunting for both of us, isn't it?
It is. It truly is bigger than life. And we all play in a very important role when it comes to things having to do with the outdoors, particularly in terms of wildlife conservation, of which hunting has played such an important part in terms of not only maintaining what we have, but properly managing the habitat and the animal species that live in that different types of terrain and different types of areas of different type of vegetation. So, with DSC, one of the great things is, to me, it's the finest hunting organization in the world, conservation wise. And we pull from so many different areas. And we've always prided ourselves as DSC as being this very friendly group. And so to me, that was one of the things that really kind of drew me to DSC actually about 40 years ago when you get right down to it. And, to be a part of that organization, but to be a part of the whole of wildlife conservation, whether it's as you mentioned, from some of the TV shows that I've done or the writing I've done or some of the others, all those things play very nicely together. And I really feel like it's up to every one of us to be stewards and great stewards and ambassadors of conservation and wildlife management and hunting as well, too.
Do you feel like we're on the right track where we are today? Kids have so many distractions. I've read that women have replaced kids as the fastest growing demographic. There's a lot of screens out there. I know hunting is very central to, and fishing, very central to my son's upbringing and people we hang out with. I feel like in some ways we're winning, and in some ways, including winning hearts and minds, but also there's a lot of distractions for kids that, 40 years ago when I was learning about hunting wasn't there. What are we, where are we winning? Where are we losing? Where do we need help?
I think we are winning in certain different ways. The population has increased so dramatically over the years. And unfortunately, such as when I was a youngster, it was they pretty much rule our, culture when you got right down to it. You knew about life. You knew about life and death, both. And these days, I think we've gotten away from some of those things in terms of, for the longest time, where everybody thought, well, the food comes from the grocery store. They had forgotten that food had to come from somewhere else. And I think, unfortunately, COVID, or fortunately from that perspective, COVID kind of brought it back to the fact that, hey, what am I going to do if there's not any food in the grocery store? How am I going to feed my family? Or I'm very interested in maintaining the health of my family. So I want the very best possible food, which kind of led to some of the local war type movement. Those things I think have been a very positive, or play a positive role in making people much more aware of wildlife and conservation and hunting, and have gotten a lot more people into that sport. Now I think as the food kind of came back to the grocery stores, we may have lost some people, but here's the deal. Those people, even though they may not be very active in hunting and fishing right now, they do now have a true understanding about a lot of things that they previously didn't have. With the children on the child side of things, that's a very tough road that we hoe, because, as you mentioned, there's so many distractions out there, and there's so many organized sports that are out there, where in a lot of these areas, the kids, from the time that they can start school, they're involved in some type of games kind of thing. And to me, there's a lot of character building that can come from that. But there's also something occasionally that's lost by not being able to spend time with mom and dad and granddad and uncles and aunts, maybe going on a camping trip or going on a fishing trip. So I think, as long as there's ways that we can find ways to balance some of those things with the outdoors, I think we'll continue making greater gains. I know, like, you mentioned the Texas Wildlife Association. Through the Texas Wildlife Association, we started the Texas Youth Hunting Program, and that's been in existence now for a while. And I think, if I recall, I can't remember the exact figures, but I think in the process of that, we've taken probably very close to 50,000 kids on their first hunting experience. Now we've tried to include some fishing as well too. And the beauty of that is, every time that they went out on those hunts, they had to have a parent or a guardian with them.
Yeah.
And will all those people continue hunting? You know, we hope so, but
Right.
the probably no. But again, now they have an understanding why hunting is important, in terms of not only the wildlife that we enjoy to eat and those kind of things, but in perpetuating the habitat and improving the habitat, so that there's a higher quality of life, not just for the game animals, but all the non-game animals that are there as well too. So I think the more we can bring that into play, I tell people all the time, I said, if, let's say, you live in a town and or city, and you live on the 15th floor of a high-rise apartment building, and you got this little nook outside your window where you can put a flowering plant. If you'll do that, you can be a contributor to wildlife. You're providing food, you're providing cover, perhaps, for some insects that will eventually provide food for birds. And so, or even the nectar that comes from, or the pollen that comes from those flowers, in terms of bees. So, all those things are, everybody out there can be a wildlife contributor. And I think that's one of the things that I really try to push, particularly with the youngsters. I tell them a lot of times, there are two things: there's conservation, wildlife conservation, or conservation and preservation. Conservation promotes life. It is the wise use of whatever it is.
Yep.
Preservation is a very tunnel vision, narrow-minded look at things. And to me, the perfect examples are those, or some of the things we've done with wolves and grizzly bears. We have so concentrated on them that we've forgotten all the other animals that have been removed that they have
Yeah.
eaten. And so, to me, there's conservation and there's preservation, and those are the kind of things that I try to parlay into the kids. I also talk a lot about butterflies when I'm around kids. Uh, I've only encountered, I think, one kid over the years that was scared of butterflies. Everybody else,
Mm.
oh my God, they're the most beautiful things. Well, if I can get them thinking about butterflies, then I can start talking to them about wildlife habitat and why it's important to manage animals, properly manage, to make sure that those butterflies and those caterpillars that turn into butterflies have more than sufficient food to make it to where they become butterflies. All that, again, plays very nicely into wildlife conservation. And to me, it's a way to get kids and a lot of people who may not be interested in white-tailed deer or mule deer or elk or whatever the species is, but when you start explaining it to them in those terms, get very basic with them, I think we're making headways. I think we're making headways.
I hope so. And I feel that way too in the interactions I have out there at the hunting public and the non-hunting public. And I think for those that are either listening to this on your favorite podcast source or watching on our YouTube channel, one thing to remember when you're talking to somebody that's in that middle 80% that doesn't identify pro hunting or against hunting, that's really just kind of in that middle, is we're all, I'll use the word detractors. I think Larry used that word detractors. We all take from wildlife in one way or another,
Yes,
whether it's
we
just
do.
building a home on land or whether it's building, driving your car on a road or dams or bridges. We all take away, but I feel so strongly that it's hunters and conservationists that go out of their way to give back, not only with our hearts and minds, but our pocketbook and our taxes and the things that we've done that to ourselves. You talked a lot about the youth. I read something very interesting about you, Larry. I'd love to hear a little bit of this story. Everybody, of course, knows you as Mr. Whitetail, and you've shot some of the biggest bucks in the history of North America. But I've also read that if you had to pick one mount in your whole trophy room to symbolize what hunting means to you, it wouldn't be some 180, 190 inch Boone and Crockett buck. It would actually be a spike that you shot when you were 14 years old with your grandfather with a single shot 12 gauge. We're going to talk about single shots here later in the pod.
Okay.
But will you talk to me about that buck, the ground shrinkage, hunting with grandpa, dad, and why that deer means so much to you, even more than the giants?
I grew up at a time when we didn't have very many deer. We hunted deer every year. My dad ran coon hounds. We had beagles, and so we hunted a lot. And I fished with my granddad until he passed away. And well, still at a relatively young age, but I too grew up looking at photographs and reading stories and outdoor life, sports and fields, field and stream, all those kind of things. And I loved the concept of hunting and being a part hunter and listening to the stories. That particular buck that you're addressing, it was the opening morning of the 1961 hunting season in Texas, which was November the 16th back then. We had finally gotten some deer, and spikes were legal. And I'm sitting in this oak tree about 30, 40 feet off the ground, not very far behind our home out in rural Texas, about 80 miles west of Houston. And here's shot off in the distance. And I'd gotten to that deer stand, which was a 2x4 nailed between two, with the narrow side up,
Love it.
up between the fork of a tree up there. And I'm sitting up there, here shot. And oh my God, I'm sitting there. I've got my granddad's single shot 12 gauge shotgun. I got a double-aught buck stuck in the barrel. I got another double-aught buck stuck right here in my between my teeth. So I can
Nice.
grab it very quickly if I need to shoot a second time. And I hear a shot and I hear something scurrying. And I look down and oh my God, here comes the world record white-tailed deer. Obviously 40 points, 40-inch spread. And he stops right underneath me. And all of a sudden I remember, I'm so excited. I remember I do have this shotgun. Well, I point this shotgun because it didn't really have sights. It had a little gold bead on the front of the barrel at the end of the muzzle and a little notch in the back. So I cock that hammer and I shoot this deer, and this deer whop goes down, and oh my gosh, I'm in seventh heaven. And just about then that deer jumps up and runs off, and I'm going, oh my God, what did I do? What did I do? And I remember, oh yeah, I can reload. So I push the lever on the back of the receiver there, and open the shotgun. Well, in my excitement, I tug a little bit too hard on the fore end, and those old shotguns, if you tug too much on the fore end, it disengages the barrel. So all of a sudden,
Oh,
I'm sitting there. I've got the buttstock in one hand, the fore end in this end, still got the double-aught buck stuck in my mouth, and I'm watching this barrel go
oh
into the
my
ground,
gosh.
sticks in the mud about 40 feet. World record whitetail deer is running off. And for a moment, I seriously thought about just diving out of that tree. And thank God I didn't. I kind of halfway fell down that tree and got down in there, still had all the parts together, still a buckshot in my mouth, grabbed that barrel, pulled the buckshot out of my mouth, blew all the blood out, and stuffed that buckshot in there. And away I go in the direction of where this deer is, looking way out there, expecting somewhere in those bushes and cedars and Yopon holly, he's got to be, not watching where I'm running. I fall right over something, and I thought, oh my God, what was that? And I turned around and looked. Here's this world record white-tailed deer, and as the adrenaline starts to leave the lenses of my eyes, I watch this deer go from 40 points, 40 inches to this absolutely beautiful spike. It's got about a 5-inch spike on one side and a 7-inch spike on the other side. I was unbelievably happy. Finally, had been hunting since I was 4 years old. Finally, I had a deer. And as you mentioned, the mount looks like it was done by a quote unquote taxidermist that
Uh-huh.
put a neck mount on it. It looks like an overgrown rat with antlers, and it's on a piece of cedar wood. And I've got it. I'm looking up at it right now here in my office.
Nice.
And if all the mounts I have here in this office and a bunch that I have scattered elsewhere, somebody said you got to get rid of all but one, that would be the one, because that to me, of all the animals I've ever taken, I've had great memories with hunting with my daughters, my grandkids, and friends, and all those other things. But to me, if that one mount that is not very well done, uh, it's the most important mount I have. It really set me on a trail to become what I've become over these years in so many different ways.
Yeah. It's really amazing. I talk about in my book what the mountain knows about a little bit about taxidermy and why, for me, this taxidermy represents when I can't do it anymore, that I can look on the memories. But
Yes,
I also
sir.
talk about the fact that in our lives, when people go to their deathbeds, 100 years from now for both of us, 150 years from both of us, may we live so long, that nobody's on their deathbed telling their friends and family or their priest or rabbi, you know, I wish I had hunted less. I wish I had spent less time with my friends and family in the woods. We talk a little bit about, because I think this is something you and I might also have in common. And I'm not joking when I tell you, I don't know what I had for breakfast yesterday. It would take me a minute to think about it. But I can look at every mount in my trophy room or my kids' mounts, and I can tell you the year, almost guaranteed to be accurate. But even if the year's not accurate, who I was with, how far the shot was, what the weather was like that day, what state or country it came from. Can you just talk about the impact? Maybe there's non-hunters listening or new hunters or people that are curious about hunting. Do you share that sense in that you can't remember what you had for breakfast yesterday, but you can tell every, like if we went one by one in the beautiful trophies you have behind me, do you know every last detail of who you're with and what the weather was? You have that type of memory, and is that what some of those mounts represent to you?
Absolutely, without a doubt, without a doubt. Those memories are so very important. And to illustrate that, several years ago, I used to do a little bit of inspirational speaking, and I was speaking to a group of professional baseball players, football players, basketball, soccer, all those kind of things. And we were talking about the things that are important to you in life. And so I got up there and one in the conversation says, how many of y'all remember the first time you hit the ball, you caught the ball, you scored a goal, you did this, you know, and there were a few people that held up their hand, but a very small portion of those people that were there, thankfully, a lot of those same guys and gals that were in there had also hunted and fished in the past. And so I again said, okay, how many remember the first time that you caught a fish? The first time you went hunting, the first animal that you were able to take, any of those things really relating to hunting and fishing, and the vast majority of the people in there held up their hand. Now, these were people who made their living by playing games. And to me,
Yeah.
if you play something with a ball, it's a game. You know, to me, I'm often tell people whether they agree or not, there are two true sports, and that's hunting and fishing. And I'm sure there's some that disagree with that, but to me, it made the point not only to me, which I'm hoping it would do, to them how important those memories are. That those are everlasting memories. As you mentioned, I can look at any mount in here and or photographs, and I can tell you who I was with, so many different details, the things that I was thinking about, even things that were going on in my life at the time, and that those mounts or those photographs help me remember. But they're just a prod, if you will, because even if I couldn't see them in my memory, I can recall each of the hunts that I've been on, and I've been on a lot of them. And but I can remember the people who I was with, the circumstances involved, the good times we had, the questionable times we had at times when we had 4 flat tires and we were 20 miles from the closest main road, or getting bucked off by a horse in a bog somewhere
Yeah.
just soaking wet, or, going for an entire day because you forgot to pack enough water with you. I mean, all those kind of things. Those to me are very much character building in a lot of different ways. But my gosh, they're fabulous memories. I'm so thankful that I've had the opportunities that I've had to have experienced those things and to have been with the people who I've been able to associate with over these many years.
When did it first become apparent to you? Because it was very. I look back at a couple very specific moments. When did it become apparent to you? And I know your degrees in wildlife biology, things like that, but when did you realize that your actual career, your actual job, your actual primary source of income? Because a lot of people dream about it. Very few of us get to do it. When did you really realize for the first time, hey, this hunting thing, this conservation thing, might be something I could do as my profession full time? And I say that in light of when I first left the Air Force to go full time guiding. A lot of people around me were like, well, that's cute, but what are you going to do for a living?
Yeah.
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 And while I use that as inspiration to be like, I'll prove myself that I can do this. But what was that time in your life where you're like, I'm going to actually be a professional hunter? I'm going to earn income by hunting. I'm going to do what very few people are able to do. When was that kind of aha or breakthrough moment for you? Do you remember it?
I do, to a point. My background, of course, grew up out in the country, and I was able to spend a lot of time out in the woods, spend a lot of time reading, as we mentioned, Jack O'Connor and a whole bunch of other writers at the time. So there was always that desire to somehow down the way be able to do that. And then I started visiting with some of the local game wardens who were friends of my dad and our family, and then found out what a wildlife biologist was. And once I talked to the first wildlife biologist, a guy named Dennis Brown, who was a biologist for Victoria, Texas, he and I ended up later on in the latter part of my career with Texas Park and Wildlife Department working together. But I could see how he had made his living. Then the writing thing was just something that I always loved to do. And I thought, man, if I can read all these stories, I feel like I can write a little bit. And, so I started writing. But probably that aha type moment really happened, I'd say probably about my freshman year in college, when I was scheduled to go to Texas A&M, and my dad, we were in the chicken business, hog business, cattle business, had many irons in the fire, and my dad was very sick with hepatitis, and they treated him wrong. Well, I went to school that first year like 2 days out of the week, and then stayed home and worked the rest of the time. But after that, wasn't long after that, my wife and I got married, and that too, hunger is a great motivator when you get right down to it. But it was at that
Amen.
stage that I had spent enough time with different people that I go, you know what, I think I can do this. And then I was very fortunate my senior year at Texas A&M to go to work under contract with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and Texas A&M's Department of Veterinary Pathology doing wildlife disease research. So at that point, I knew that's where I was headed, regardless what was going to happen.
I know you're a voracious reader, and I'm just trying to picture you as a child reading every magazine you could, which I have the same memories, every magazine I could. But Larry, what was that like the first time that one of those magazines you love to read, you saw an article in it written by Larry Weishuhn? What was that moment for you? Was that like a dream come true? Like, I can't believe this is my life? Or was it much more casual? Like, this was always the natural progression? Or were you like a dream come true? What was that moment like when you picked up, in the mail or at a newsstand, and it was an article you actually wrote?
Actually, the first article that I published was back in 1970. It was with the National Sportsman's Digest, which was an organization. I wrote an article about the desert bighorn sheep work that we were doing with Blue Tongue, and had the cover on it. And that when that thing came in the mail, it was a dream come true. I mean, it was like, oh my gosh, I have made it. If my life ends tomorrow, for the most part, in that line of perspective, it's been a success. And to me, even today, I'm fortunate I still write a great amount. And to receive a magazine that has my name, or, on a story, is just, it still kind of takes my breath away. It still just absolutely amazes me that I've been able to do this, that this has actually happened, that it continues to happen. And I'm so grateful to the good Lord to have given me a little bit of talent, but then also provided me with challenges to make me go where I really needed to go. Because I mean, there are a bunch of times during my career as a wildlife biologist and some of the other things, you know, you don't make a gosh awful amount of money, but it's a great life. Or we get to the point, and with my daughters, we needed money for something, and I'd go, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And you know, Lord, what are we going to do? And something to come up. You know, it always
Yeah.
absolutely amazes me, and still to some extent, the magazines, the TVs, the other stuff that we're involved in, or in the podcast. You know, it just, I mean, oh my gosh, is it real? You know,
Yeah.
is it really real? And it has been, thank God.
Thank God. Amen. It's amazing you put yourself out there, but you know, I also believe, and I think you believe this too, the more you give, the more you get. And
Amen.
in some ways it becomes a selfish thing for me. I'm like, well, I really want to contribute more, but I also know that when I do that, you know, the universe, God, the spirit world, whatever you want to call it, I know it's coming back to me. It just always feels like the more people you help, the more doors open. And so if you're somebody listening and feel like you've been trying to do that first philanthropic event or volunteer for a fishing derby at a nearby community, you know, lake or one of these outdoor events, Arizona's huge for them with, you know, youth mentors in the outdoors. Most states are now. Yeah, just get involved. You won't regret it. You're going to learn a lot about the world, yourself, what you're good at, what you want to get better at, and just get a better understanding of where you are in the space. We talked a lot about your writing. I want to have a little bit about fun with this. You and I both have a pretty extensive TV hunting career. You more than me, and I want you to share a story that I recently found out about. This is going to be, I might say the state, and this hunt's going to come running back to your memory, maybe not. But I heard on a filmed hunt, you know, because having a camera there changes the game. If you and I were just hunting out of a tree stand, a ground blind spot and stock, we're going to do what Dan and Larry do. We're going to do our thing. But man, when there's a camera there, and for those of you guys that watch and like you guys make it look so easy, taking 10 days into a 22-minute episode, well, it's not so easy because there's so much
No.
drama that goes on with the camera. So I want to hear a little bit about a story where you were in Kentucky. You had your Thompson Center Encore. You had what rumors were a 180 class or better 10 points standing in front of you. And someone once said, blowing steam out of his nose like a dragon in the freezing cold. You had the crosshair on him. And apparently, this cameraman was just milking the footage saying, don't shoot. I don't have him. Not yet. Not clear. No shot. The whole time. How do you keep your composure like that in a moment like that? Did you ever hunt with him again? And kind of tell us that story about this fire breathing
This is
monster.
this happened to be a really big deer. We had a lease that we called Game Trails. There's 14,000 acres where the trade water runs into the Ohio River at Sturgis, Kentucky. Fabulous chunk of country. It was one of the largest contiguous properties there. And there was a buck that I had found through scouting a couple of different times. I finally figured out where he was going to be. It was a creek bottom just off the trade water running into the Ohio. It was one of those mornings where it was cold. I mean, really cold. We were down in the bottom. Humidity was high there. I was hiding behind a log, had the cameraman back behind me, and I just had a feeling that this was a place to take this buck. And sure enough, here he comes running in. He stops. He's backlit by the sun. Steam is rising off of his body, and every breath that he takes, he looks like a fire-breathing dragon coming out. This buck would have easily netted in the 180s, and I was using a Thompson Center. I was shooting a 30-06 at the time, an Encore, and this deer stops, and I've got it cocked. I'm talking to the cameraman behind me. Said, I'm going to take him. I'm going to take him. Said, don't shoot. Don't shoot. I don't have him. I don't have him. Don't have him. Don't shoot. Don't shoot. So, you know, we're there to do what's right. Try to get this deer on film. And so the deer's there for about 90 seconds. And normally I tell people you have 5 seconds to see a buck and make the evaluation, age and all the other kind of stuff and make the shot. Well, I could have easily taken the shot, but he kept saying, I don't have him. I don't have him on camera. So I watched this deer walk away, and you know, this was a dream buck. I mean, unbelievably big deer. I'd hunted for him for several different times, weeks when you got right down to it in the past, and the deer walks away. And I thought, well, I guess, hopefully he'll show up again. Well, he didn't until about 3 years later when I was by myself and didn't have a cameraman. But and I did finally end up taking this deer. But what the thing about it is I get a call. Tom Miranda was producing our show at the time, and Tom and I go back a long, long way. And I get this call from Tom about 3 weeks later, and he's Larry, what in the world is the matter with you? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, that deer. I said, deer? He said, what deer? He said, that unbelievable 180 10 point that looked like he had baseball bats on his head. Why didn't you shoot him? And I said, how do you know about that deer? And he goes, well, we got about 90 seconds of him. All you had to do is pull the trigger. And I go, oh, Lord,
Oh no.
to answer your question, I did eventually end up hunting with the cameraman again, but it wasn't immediately.
I love it. That's so fun. We talk a lot about standards here at our company, Diamond Outfitters. We actually call it the Diamond Standard. And, we talk a lot about we don't quit and how we're really in the customer service business, cleverly disguised in the guide business. I read a story you wrote a few years back called The Never Give Up Buck. You took a shot, found no blood. A lot of guys would have called it a miss and kind of moved on. But you expanded the grid, kept looking, and you found them. And it bled internally, which you and I both know, especially depending on the species, that this isn't actually that uncommon. Let's talk a little bit about your protocol. I have a follow-up question to this too, or at least a follow-up thought. What's your protocol when a shot goes wrong? And what is your advice to the modern hunter who might be too quick to give up the search? What's protocol when a shot's a little awry?
The buck that you described was actually shot by a friend of mine, and who I hunt with, David Cotton. And there was a lot of water. We looked that evening, could not find it, could not find any sign of a deer. I went back the next morning and I found two little white hairs that had been cut about
Oh my
maybe a
gosh.
quarter to an eighth of an inch long. And so then we just started expanding our grid beyond that. But to me, you do never give up. With that particular deer, we could have easily said, well, no, we looked, we didn't find him. Generally, what I tell people, it depends on what you're using. If it's a bow or crossbow or a rifle or whatever, or handgun, shotgun, whatever you choose, even a spear, I guess, to a point. But generally, if that deer doesn't go down right away, the first thing I want to do is I want to mark exactly in my mind that I know exactly where that deer was standing. The next thing is I want to mark the spot where I last saw him go into in the trees and that kind of thing. At that point, I'll probably give him, if he doesn't go right down, I'll probably give him maybe, but if he does go right down, chances are I'm gonna put a second shot into him, because usually if a deer goes down real fast, you may have just barely nicked something that just knocked him out. So I'd rather lose half a pound of meat than to lose an entire deer. But I usually wait probably maybe 5 to 10 minutes as I again go back, and I may even take out a notebook, or if I've got a camera or my phone, and I'll take a photograph of where that deer was standing and where that deer went in, so that I know exactly where it was to go to. And then after about 5 or 10 minutes, I'll go down to the point to where that deer was to start with, and I'll look for blood, look for hair, or those kind of things. Then the last time that I saw him, and then hopefully the ground is such that if there is no blood, that I can see some tracks, or I can see where he turned over leaves, and I'll follow him maybe just a little bit. If I don't find blood within maybe 10, 15, 20 steps, I will back out and give that animal an opportunity to stiffen up and lay down. And then I'll probably wait several hours, sometimes overnight, sometimes in the areas that I hunt. Because of the number of coyotes and hogs that we have, you can't, because they will, if that animal is debilitated, they're going to run him down and kill him and eat him. Or if he didn't go very far, you'll get there and you'll be very fortunate to find, bloody spots, some antlers, kind of thing. But I'll generally give them at least, a couple, 3 hours, then go back in and very quietly, and try to do it with a minimum of people. And one of the things that you run into, if you get all your buddies to come help you, is they're going to be stepping on spots that you need to be looking at that they may not see that you could. So, and then once you get on the track, just take your time. Don't push that animal too hard. If you notice that he jumps up, and you can tell by the blood and the steps and that he takes, Is he squirting out both sides? Where, if he walked by a bush, how high was the blood? What color was the blood? Is it frothy blood? Is it muscle blood? Is there rumen content? All those kind of things. All those play into how long I'm going to follow them up. We're fortunate in Texas and a few other places where there's a goodly number of people now that have good blood dogs, and
Yeah.
it's legal to do so. If that animal you don't find it very quickly. Generally, what we try to do these days, I've got access to several friends who have some really good dogs. I'll call them and say, okay, as soon as you can get here, we got a deer that we can follow. So that's usually my advice. If you do have somebody that has access to a blood trailing dog, is trust that dog a whole lot more than you would your own eyesight or your sense of tracking.
I was first introduced to blood dog at a high level on an archery hunt I did in Illinois for our old TV show about 13, 14 years ago, give or take. And out here in Arizona, we have coyotes, we have mountain lions, we have bears, we have a little bit of wolves. We don't have the hogs for the moment that certainly Texas is known for, but loss of game to predation, it can be a real thing. But I didn't really realize, Larry, how how quick it could happen. For example, in Arizona, coming up as a young hunter and a young guide, if we had to let an elk sit overnight and didn't find it the next morning, sometimes, usually you'd lose part of the hind quarter, things like that to a coyote. But my first experience listening to a hunter in an Illinois camp, maybe it's been closer to 18 years ago. He was really worried he was going to lose the whole deer. And, at that time in my young hunting mind, I was like, well, I mean, I'm thinking to myself, well, you might lose the back, kind of where like start there around the backside. And boy, we went out there and it was nothing. It was completely gone. I was ready to argue with the guy. Sir, this can't be your deer. This is like a 3-year-old carcass. This can't be a deer you shot last night. And I think a lot of people like me just have no idea how quick, especially if you have hogs in an area, they'll make it just bones. And some of these wildlife, they'll even eat the softer bones, and you've got nothing left. And it really opened my mind to that, because I, like you, if I think it's not a great shot, I do want them to sit as long as possible and stiffen up. But if you're just going to go find a skull and antlers and a few scattered bones, not a great outcome either. I want to follow that up with I don't know if my answer was controversial or not, but I'm going to tell you my answer, and I'd be curious your take. I did on an interview. This is when I was still hosting the Best of the West TV shows in its glory days. And I always tell people privately and publicly, I was never a rifle hunter. I was always an archery hunter. To this day, I'm still a rifle hunter. I just played one on TV. To this day, I'm still an archery hunter, but I played a rifle hunter on TV because I prefer the bow in most situations, not on our coos deer most of the time, but that's a story for another day. But the controversial comment I made was, it was an upbeat interview about technology and how technology is helping hunters and all these different avenues, which for the most part, I agreed with the interviewer. Hey, this is helping here, and this is helping here, and this is helping here. And the question was asked, is there any downside to any of this? And I was very clear in my answer, and I'd be curious on your take. They were talking about some of the long range technology in both the archery and rifle world. And I said, well, I do think there's a big downside. And they said, what's the downside? I said, I think we're at a 100-year or higher new high, or tying old highs for wounded game loss, between guys taking archery shots at 100 yards, 80 yards, rifle guys shooting 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1300 yards. I feel like we've gone backwards as far as recovery. And part of it, we just talked about tracking. Part of it may be effort or mindset on that recovery. But I feel like we're at a time right now where wound loss, animals not recovered from both rifles, muzzleloaders, and arrows, are probably at the highest they are since, cowboy time, since Indians, roamed North America. Would you agree with that? Disagree with that? Do you think are we in a crossroads with the blend of technology? But also, for me, I'm a conservationist first, and I know you are too. That's why we have a wounded animal policy at both Diamond Outfitters and Zero Outfitter Fees. But with all this great technology, do you feel like wound loss is back to historical highs?
I think wound loss is, I don't know if it's historical highs, but it's got to be, if not, it's got to be very close. And a lot of that comes in, I think, because of our trust in technology. We've got ammo, scopes, guns now very capable in terms of actually putting an animal down at 1,000 to 1,200 yards. Should we be shooting at those distances? Really, as far as I'm concerned, for the most part, no, because we still have the variable of dealing with wind and the human factor. And uh, I know for a fact that I shoot my handguns, my 44 mags and 454 Kasuls out to 500 yards, and I can keep them in about a 12-inch circle, hit a 12-inch gong at those distances. But I would never, ever shoot an animal at those distances. Uh, if you think about it, even the fastest rifle that's out there at 1,000 yards, it takes a full second for that bullet to hit that, to reach that animal. In 1 second, an animal can take one step, and what would have been a fatal hit now all of a sudden is back into the paunch. And those bigger animals, particularly such as elk, they're not going to show any reaction at all. And everybody's going to go, yeah, well, you missed that one, and in essence, even though the guy may never know that he wounded it, or the lady or whoever's shooting, in essence, they did. And and we're losing animals that way. I think uh, those guns, those bows, crossbows, muzzle loaders, handguns, everything is capable of hitting a target a long way off. But still, to have the downrange energy that it needs to really do the damage that it can do, or to have the penetration that it needs to, is not really there at those longer ranges. And most of us, even though we may be able to sit at the bench in 1,000 yards, keep them in a 6-inch circle, in a hunting situation, when you've been walking and you're excited, there's no telling where that barrel is when you pull the trigger. It's like with handguns. People say, aren't handguns hard to shoot? I said, no, they're like a rifle, where the barrel's pointed when the trigger's pulled, where the bullet goes. Same thing there in those long distances. And then you kick into the aspect of what the wind can do. And even though we've got some great ammunition out there now, bullet design that bucks the wind and all that kind of stuff, there's still a lot of variables that come into play. And I think we've given the people the impression that, yes, if you have this technology in terms of a rangefinder scope, you've got this technology, that technology, that the technology itself will put that animal down. And it doesn't work that way.
I
So
always
yes,
talk about,
I do think we have a higher crippling loss than what we had for many, many years. The other thing is for the most part, we have, with technology that we have these days, we've taken a lot that was between this ear and this ear and put it at the fingertips. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and we don't have the woodsmanship that we used to, uh, of knowing, yeah, that animal's a little bit too far. The wind is going to do this. No, I'm not going to shoot because the wind is, I can, there's a lot of those kind of things that come into play, or even from a tracking perspective. That's one of the reasons I kind of went back to suggesting a dog, because I've tracked a number of deer over the years, some that I've shot. And of course, like you, I've spent time on a lot of the different ranches guiding that I used to take care of. And the average guy that thinks he's pretty good at tracking sucks, quite
yeah,
frankly. And
yeah,
and not to hurt their feelings, but they'd have been a whole lot better off if they'd just left me alone, let me stay at camp, and I'll come get you when I find your animal, kind of thing. Because they were, as I mentioned earlier, they were stepping on things, or walking out ahead when they should have been walking way behind, and then even if they saw something, they really didn't know how to read that sign. And so
yeah,
that, to me, is where some of the woodsmanship comes in. And again, technology is great, but it's how you utilize that technology, and
yeah.
to what extent do you take it.
I remember at a lot of my speaking engagements, because I have one of my ones I do at Dallas Park Club every year, is long range
Right.
hunting and ethics, and I added that and ethics component to it when I started teaching that seminar. And one of the first things I'll say is, "What's the most dangerous part of a rifle?" And I say, if you don't know, it's the same thing that's most dangerous part of a car. It's the nut behind the wheel, right?
That's exactly right.
So when people are advertising a 1,200-yard rifle right out of the box, the rifle is a 1,200-yard rifle out of the box. The equipment is, but the variable is the shooter. The variable is the wind, and we could go down a long list of it. But yeah, I think we both share a concern about wound loss and tracking and perception of, well, I would have seen it if you would have hit, or there would have been blood. Not necessarily. We are really snobby, and I'm proud of the snobbiness in our contracts of hunting with us. Is, if we think your animal's a lethal hit, we're going to continue moving heaven and earth till we find that animal, even if it's nothing but skull and bones.
Right.
And you know, some other a lot of people overseas, it's very common. If you shoot an animal, whether you're covered or not, that's your animal. It's very common in Europe, Africa, to kind of have that. You did talk a little bit about tracking, so I've got to take a little bit of a bunny trail because you're going to appreciate this. You literally said something that made me smile. And my son was very fortunate when he was 8 years old to go to Africa for the first time.
Oh
And
man.
when he was 8 years old going to a safari in Africa, it was also his dad's. It was also my first time. So he gets to do it at 8, and I'm like close to 40, I think, 30, 38 probably. And we had taken 6 Purple Hearts over there. It was a group you would have absolutely loved. And we were on this big plains game safari, and we had a couple of our inner circle clients with us too. And kind of towards one of the ends of the safari, this guy is talking to his wife back home, and she all of a sudden decides she wants to hunt or she wants him to hunt a giraffe, because in this part of his trophy room, he actually is going to design this bar with the 4 legs of the giraffe as his table, and he had this big elaborate design and da 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 da. So they set the hunt up. I had never been on a giraffe hunt or followed on a giraffe hunt, so I was very intrigued to see what that all would look like, and I wanted my son to go. We actually filmed it for the show, believe it or not. And here's what was really interesting to me. So it was like a 45-minute drive to this giraffe concession, which I didn't even know there were concessions just designed for giraffes. And we got there, the landowner kind of gave us the lowdown. He said, look, the particular bull giraffe you're going to be hunting, he's very large, and here's kind of what you're looking for. And the PH and the 2 trackers that were there shook their head in agreement. And I further learned this is a massive, miles and miles of hectares. I don't know how big, but miles and miles and miles. And as you know, most of the high fence operations in Africa aren't to necessarily keep animals in or out, because they can leave these concessions. It's to try and keep poachers out in most cases the best possible. So anyways, we go out there, and we had a little bit of rain. So we're out there with these trackers. Now, I'm 38 years old. I run, what was becoming the largest outfitting business in North America at the time.
Yes,
So I
sir.
fancy myself a halfway decent tracker. And I'm out there with my son. So of course I always want to make a good impression on him. And we've driven on this property for like 45 minutes to an hour when we cut our first track that stopped the tracker. Now, it's important to understand in this bunny side trail here that we're seeing tracks all the time, but this time the tracker actually stopped. And he said, I think, he's not talking English, but he translates to, I think this might be our bull. So we walk for a couple hundred yards, and then he says, let's go back to the truck. And so our PH takes us back to the truck. And I'm whispering to my son, and the hunter's in front of us, and I don't want the hunter to hear it, I don't think. And I'm like, son, I want you to learn this the right way, but I don't know that this is the bull. Like, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of giraffe tracks. I don't know that this is ultimately the bull. And so we went back to the vehicle, and we drove for maybe another 20 minutes, and he stops. He knew what roads he wanted us to go check. He says, I think this is that bull. And I'm like rolling my eyes when he's not looking. And I'm telling my son, I'm like, there's 10,000 giraffe tracks right here. So this goes on. I think you know where I'm going with this. This goes on for like an hour, and I'll be damned if we didn't walk around the corner real slow on part of spot stock, and the bull was standing in the tracks. And so we got the bull. We got it all on film. He did end up making an amazing table mount for his trophy room. But he also, I don't know if you've seen this version of this mount before, but he also had the mount where the giraffe is drinking water, and it's suspended in the air, and it goes all the way back to the shoulder. But the shoulder, Larry, doesn't come out of the wall. It's suspended in the air. So the only thing touching the water, the habitat, is his tongue. So it's somehow rebarred through the mouth and
Oh
the
my
tongue.
gracious.
It's so incredible. But my point to the whole story was, if just when you think you're a halfway decent tracker, oh my gosh, I was so humbled. I will never forget that day. And really, I'm like, I'm a pretty dang good tracker. And I went out there, and this guy followed this bull for probably 3 miles. And even when we went around that corner, I'm still telling my son, there's 10,000 giraffe tracks here. There's no way we're on that bull. And when we were in a corner, and he had the markings and he had everything we were looking for, and he was standing in the tracks, Larry, and I'm sure you've seen something like that before.
It's amazing. I've spent time in Africa as well too with the trackers. I've also spent some time, probably like you have, down in Mexico with some of the old time trackers years ago, and they taught me so very much. Unfortunately, my memory isn't good enough to remember everything. So every once in a while, I'll get in the situation like you're talking about, and I think I got it figured out, and I go, Oh, dummy, you have no idea. You didn't even get close to the animal that you thought you were going to, that you thought you were tracking. But, too, some of those guys in Africa are truly phenomenal. We tracked a buffalo in the Salk Conservancy one time in a linear straight line of traveling, not that we followed it for 18 miles. And this particular bull finally crossed into the other concession. But this particular bull, they he'd walk through herds of hartebeest, herds of zebra, herds of other buffalo, of elephants, all those kind of things. Those trackers, somehow or another, I don't know what they were looking for, but that one individual track, which to me did not look a whole lot different than all the rest of them, they followed that particular one. I mean, we did catch a glimpse of him just as he was going into the next concession. And there was no doubt they had described this bull to start with, and he was really wide and really heavy and one of the bigger bulls in that area. But I was just truly amazed at their abilities. Then
Yeah.
and you try to learn, you try to learn as much as you can from them. And in some instances, they, like you have an idea to where this deer is going to go when you get on a track. He's probably going to go to water. And I've been with some of those guys too, where they knew there were, like elephants, they knew where there's some big shade trees. And we'd follow that track for a while, and then all of a sudden we'd leave the track, and then 30, 40 minutes later, you'd pick that track back up. Well, those guys too knew the habits of those animals so well that they knew that's where they were going to end up, when it got to be hot, or that was the water hole that they're going to. That goes back to some of the woodsmanship things that we were talking about
Yes.
too.
Yeah, for sure. One of my first biggest things, biggest eye openers as a guide and outfitter when I started my international journey, was how many things I could R&D. Now, most people think R&D is research and development. I jokingly say R&D stands for rip off and duplicate. There were so many things I learned in international hunting from the customer service perspective,
Yes.
meal preparation.
Yes.
Every time I travel somewhere, it's like I'm overwhelmed by the beauty and the nature and the newness, but my entrepreneur brain is like, oh, I've never thought of serving food like that, or I've never thought of, oh, that would make a great meal, or oh, I love how, we don't always have this facilities like they do in some of the overseas hunts where we had an Argentina hunt where this giant red stag had been taken. Well, they have such a dedicated team dedicated to cape and taxidermy preparation. They'd already boiled the skull out. So we had like this 500 stag, one of the clients harvested, already basically bleached a day or two after he got it. And it was in the kitchen with us when we had a celebratory meal. So there's all these different things. We talked a lot about tracking here in the last few minutes, but you and I both share in common that our first overseas trip came later in our hunting career. Mine was in my 30s. Hadn't done it, from my 20s, like some peers of ours have. What other things from that when you took your first trip to Africa that flipped the switch for you, things that you apply to North America aside from the tracking? Are there lessons from your overseas hunts that you apply into your personal hunting in North America, guiding in North America, or just your overall knowledge as a conservationist?
One of the things I truly enjoy is looking at the different cultures and the different way that people look at hunting and all those other kind of things as well too. But absolutely, that I didn't make my first trip to Africa until I was in my 50s, and then I went back many many times, sometimes 2 or 3
Yes.
times a year. But in every one of those, I learned I learned something about how to prepare something for or make an experience better for somebody, whether it was for a client or whether it was for a friend that was there that maybe had not been in those situations, kind of thing. I learned from vegetation. I learned from them to look for what the animals were eating, where they were nipping on, what part of the plants that they were nipping off of. So to me, there was always something there to learn from. And you're right about the personal service that you get on some of these international trips is just phenomenal in terms of how they take care of people, and it's truly caring as well too. It's not just a gratuitous type thing, and I truly
Yeah.
appreciate that. But to me, one of the really strong learning aspects was looking at it also from a wildlife biologist perspective as to how do you manage this species to complement the habitat or to complement the management of this other species that you're working on. So there, to me, it's like every time I go hunting, I learn something. To me,
Hmm.
there's always I try to keep an open mind about everything. There, I'll also learned a long time ago that you never make a very sound, solid statement about this is the way it is. Particularly when you talk about wildlife or anything like that.
Sure.
With me, it's always this has been my experience. Generally, it can be said. In some instances, I always put a qualifier into that, and that was one of the things that I've learned through all the international travels that I've done as well too. But it really comes back down to I really enjoy the cultures. I love looking at the habitat, the terrain, learning what I can about the animals, learning truly about the culture of the local hunting, how they look at it, and how it plays into the overall scheme of everything that those folks do in some of those areas.
Yeah, it really is magical. And if you're listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube and you're like, man, I really want to do my first international hunt in Europe, South America, Africa, and you have apprehension about it, there's millions of outfitters like me that do what's called hosted hunts. I'm doing one in Africa, I'm doing one in Australia, where you got a lot of hand holding, from rifle transfers to me and my wife personally being on the flight you're going on, to being in the camp with you, to making sure everything gets brought back until you have that confidence to go on your own. And so I do it, and there's dozens of outfitters like me that do these hosted hunts. So yeah, I'm known for my Arizona hunts and Southwest, things like that, but I also do these hosted hunts, and a lot of my peers do too. You'll be able to meet them at places like the summer gala for Dallas Safari Club, or the annual
Right.
gala every year in either Atlanta or Houston, or eventually Dallas here in the next few years. So if you're thinking about doing something like that for the first time, and you have reservations about it, or you're like, is this country safe, or how do I get guns there? There's outfitters like me that really enjoy that process, and literally, I mean, I give you all the preparation with my team and my wife, and then we literally meet in Atlanta. We fly to Johannesburg together. We fly back together, and it's professionally outfitted the whole way, so you have that confidence. And these overseas outfitters, in a lot of ways, are very different than what we do. As I said, it's not just the hunt for them; it's the culture, it's the food. And I would also encourage you, if you're going over to some of these countries, bring your wife, bring your girlfriend. If you can bring a kid, and add days. If you're going to Spain, if you're going to Ireland, if you're going to Argentina, add a few days to these opportunities. You won't regret bringing friends and family on some of these hunts that we think of as once in a lifetime hunts until you go there, right, Larry? And then you're like, no, I'm coming back. Um, I wanted to transition as we kind of get close to our last few questions here, but um, another thing you and I have in common, and I love when I do my podcast to try and find things that I have common with the guys I look up to and my heroes. And another thing I know about you is you have kind of a single shot philosophy. Part of that could be from the handgun world, or just your upbringing and starting obviously with your first deer with the single shot shotgun. When I first was introduced to hunting, which wasn't until fifth grade, I had a single shot 22. And the way this would work is whoever would find the squirrel, we didn't run dogs. The adults ran kids instead of dogs. So if we would find a squirrel, the kids would
Exactly.
run it up a tree, right? So we'd kind of circle the squirrel in the tree, and we'd all have single shot 22s, and you kind of went around in circles till somebody got the squirrel. And so I have
Right.
very vivid memories of this. And I remember, like, my third year of doing this, so I would have been probably in seventh grade. A couple of new kids were invited to this squirrel camp, and this is before I'd done any big game. And they had like these 10-22 banana 30 clip, banana clips, 30 shot banana clips, and I was totally outgunned. But to this day, and I'm not pretending I'm some great marksman, but to this day, I find so much value in the fact that I cut my teeth on a single shot, and feeling the, I don't even want to use the word pressure, feeling the responsibility of making one shot count. Could you talk a little bit about why you talk about the philosophy, but you're a one shot guy. Could you just talk a little bit about that philosophy? I think it's critical.
My first rifle, my first deer rifle was a Remington Model 33, which is the first bolt action rifle that Remington made for a 22 long rifle cartridge kind of thing. And back when I was growing up, we didn't have a whole lot of money, and I'd have to work my tail off to buy a box of ammo. And back then, thankfully, the little store that was about 5 miles down the road, they would sell you individual cartridges. So I would save up enough to where I would have, like, I could go buy 5 cartridges when we went to the store. And that meant that I had to be really careful and make sure that my aim was true before I pulled the trigger. And I think some of that goes back to some of that, but because of that, and I also found that the guys who shot single shots when I was growing up were pretty darn good marksmen. You prided yourself on your ability to make that one first shot count in a lot of instances. And to me, that's really kind of carried through. I too then ended up having friends who shot the nylon 96 or 66s or whatever they were, and they would go bang, 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 bang. And guess what? If it was a squirrel, squirrel didn't come out of the tree, you know,
Yep.
whereas if you took your time and carefully took aim, and some of the guys finally figured that out, that even if they could shoot multiple times, it was that first shot that needed to be the one that counted. But I think it goes back to some of that philosophy. In the years that I ran a bunch of ranches where we had hunters come in, I was always thrilled to see that guy come in with a single shot rifle. Uh,
Yes.
I knew that he knew his rifle, he knew his capabilities with it, he knew the firearms capabilities of it, and in almost every instance, those are the guys who ended up taking the bigger, more mature animals, and I didn't have to follow those deer up very often because when they pulled the trigger, that animal went down. And I think it's that, and I love the fact of it. Maybe it's an ego snobbish thing of going into a hunting camp, and and you've got a single shot rifle, and everybody else has got, you know, bolt actions or lever actions or whatever else. I love all those guns. Don't get me wrong, but to go in and then put that one shot in the barrel, and when you pull the trigger, it goes exactly where you wanted it to in the bullseye, or an inch and a half higher, or something like that kind of thing. So I think there's part of that that comes into play as well too. From a personal perspective, I learned also early on, just like I was talking about the guys shooting multiple times. If I had one shot, I made that one shot count, and I did it with the first shot. And whereas if I had 5 or 6 shots, I was a little less careful about my aiming point and those kind of things. So from an animal perspective of trying to put that animal down as quickly and humanely as earthly possible, that was one of the other reasons that I really liked that single shot. But also learned that single shot's a misnomer. Uh,
Yeah.
it's not, you can't just shoot one time. Years ago when I was shooting Thompson center guns, particularly the Encore, I could shoot second and third shots quicker with it because of muscle memory and training than most people could with a bolt action. Lever action, a little bit different thing, but if they were shooting a bolt action, I could put 3 shots in a target before they could get the third shot off in most instances. And then I got to where I was really doing a lot of work with I love the Ruger number ones as well too, and I've taught myself there to shoot those very quickly if a second and third shot is necessary, kind of thing. But generally, because I am more careful personally of putting that bullet where it needs to on the first shot, I don't have to do very many follow-up shots.
Yeah. Mindset of a single shot rifle and the muscle memory are two absolutely critical components of that, of what that opportunity looks like. And just if you've got a young hunter you're starting with, and you start them with some type of single shot, they're going to internalize that. Oh, I've got one shot. And even if later in their hunting life they take up a bolt action, a lever action, if they started with that, I think archers probably think a lot in a one shot mind, like I've got one shot at this, be a little bit more patient. And, I think the one thing a lot of hunters jump into is they often, not always, but they often have a little bit more time than we think, but we get that adrenaline rush, that dopamine dump of, oh my God, there he is. It all comes down to this moment. And that's when the trigger gets pulled sometimes a little bit quicker than maybe we would otherwise like. But I love that
Exactly.
philosophy. I think it's helped a lot of people. I think your teaching on that over the decades have probably meant a lot more cleaner, ethical first shot kills, and for yourself as well and your clients. That's really great.
Yes, sir. Particularly for me.
Yeah. Well, I need all the help I can get. So any tricks of the trade are great.
Amen. Same here.
I had a couple more as we're kind of winding down here. When my wife and I started Zero Outfitter Fees, the idea was to kind of reset where people of any socioeconomic background could afford guided hunts. Because you and
Yes,
I have both seen how the everyday guy is getting priced out of the woods. You've been in this industry for decades upon decades. You've seen a little bit of everything. The gear change, the TV shows change, the hunters change. If you were sitting down with the next generation of hunters around a campfire right now, what's the one hard truth you would tell them that they might not want to hear?
that none of this is easy. None of it is easy. You have to learn to use the firearm, I hate calling them weapons, but a bow or whatever. Learn your capabilities with that particular thing, then the capabilities of it as well too. And then to me, the biggest thing I think, is to learn patience, to be a very patient hunter, to not be, to don't over expect, to think in terms of reasonable expectations. Don't expect that, I every time I go out, I'm hunting, I'm intending to shoot an animal. I'm not going hunting not to shoot an animal. Although that's not true, because there are times that I've done that too, just to be, just to be out. But, the hard truths, when you get right down to it, we look at it from an economic perspective. Now, if you go back and look at the 1950s, when the average income was $5,000 a year, a lot of hunters, and many hunters, spent $500 to $600 a year hunting. And that was a lot of money comparatively.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at salaries, let's say from $50,000 to $100,000. You know, people that hunt, they're going out and spending probably $5,000 to $10,000 a year. That percentage really hadn't changed that much in terms of what hunters spend based upon their annual income. Now, the dollar figures look scary because of that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my first lease years ago in mule deer was for $50. And now if I wanted to try to hunt that same property, it'd probably be $12,000, $10,000.
Wow.
So, but that $50 to me was every bit as important as what $10,000 to $12,000 would be today. I mean,
Yeah.
I was working for the state and didn't have a whole lot of money. So from that perspective, I don't think things have changed all that many ways. Some of the things that have changed is that we live in a time when habitat is somewhat restricted, when limited permits are, sometimes you have to apply years in advance. There's some permits that I don't think I'll ever draw. I mean, I contribute every year, and it's more of a contributing to conservation when I buy a preference point or whatever, knowing that I probably will never ever get a chance to hunt that particular place. So I think that the thing is to again have reasonable expectations in being out. And as far as the best advice that I can give to anybody out there when it comes to hunting is go hunt.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be for the biggest animal out there. I mean, I love eating venison, so we take a fair number of does every year, and those kind of opportunities are out there. There's great opportunities to go hunt squirrel hunting throughout much of the U.S. There's waterfowl hunting. There's all kinds of hunting to be had out there. It doesn't always have to be for huge animals when you get right down to it. But to me, the go hunt, the hard reality is there that, okay, it's really cold. Are you going to go hunting? Me? Absolutely. It's raining. Are you going to go hunting? Well, it's raining. I don't know if I want to get wet. I'm going to go hunt.
Yeah.
Because I want to experience it all, kind of thing. And to me, whether that's a hard truth or not, but be patient, learn as much as you can about the animals that you hunt, learn as much as you can about the terrain that you hunt. Do it by all means that you have possible to you, including the technology that's available. But then also get out on the ground and really learn your capabilities, learn what you can do, learn what you really enjoy doing. And maybe you go out and you get wet 5 or 6 times and you decide, well, maybe that's nothing I really don't want to do. That's fine
Right.
too, as far as I'm concerned. But the hard truth is we live in a changing world as well too. And we have to learn to adapt. We mentioned somewhat earlier with my career, I started out as a wildlife biologist. When I started doing writing, it was on a loose leaf notebook with a pencil that I transposed to typing, and took 35 millimeter slides that I took 36 exposure rolls and took 20 of them and hoped I got 5 pictures that I could use, to where we are with the technology that we have these days too. So, learn to adapt with the technology, learn to adapt to different hunting styles and different hunting different animals, even within your own area. Like I said, squirrel hunting is something I generally suggest. If there's squirrels available, or rabbit hunting, to anybody that's wanting to get into hunting. it's a great way to start out to learn. And even you get like I am and have hunted a lot, I still really enjoy those kind of things. But so yeah, there's some hard truths, but to me, the times are changing. Learn to adapt and be patient.
Yeah, I love it. What you might have to think about this one, but I always love this question towards the end. You have been a very public figure, so we get to see a lot of Mr. Whitetail, a lot of Larry Weishuhn. But what is one thing the world doesn't yet know about you, but we probably should?
I love to fish. I grew up. My, I said I started hunting with my dad when I was 4 years old. By the time I was 6 years old, he put me out on a deer stand, which was underneath a tree with a 22 Remington Model 33. But also during that time frame, I loved fishing, and I grew up with my granddad, that was I was very much involved when died when I was 9 years old, and it wasn't until I was probably in my 40s that I forgave him for dying, kind of
Yeah.
thing. But I do. I love to fish. I don't get a chance to do it very often, but I'd love to do it with friends. I've got a very good fun trip coming up this week after we do this with two dear friends, Jim Zumbo, who a lot of people know, and Rick Lambert, who happens to be Miranda Lambert's dad. The three of us hunt and fish together every opportunity we can, and so I'm really looking forward to that. But I get tickled. There was a story written about Jack O'Connor several years ago where this father and his son came in, and they were looking at all Mr. O'Connor's trophies and all this kind of stuff, and finally, the O'Connor asked the young man, he said, "Well, what do you think?" And he kind of looked around a little bit and he says, "I don't guess you fish at all, do you?" Because there wasn't a single. Well, I do have a cutthroat trout on my wall that I caught in Colorado years and years ago. But yeah, that's probably the one thing that people don't realize, that I do enjoy fishing, and I particularly fishing with family and friends.
Cool. Do you like saltwater or mostly freshwater or a combination of both?
I don't care.
If you can wet a
live
line,
within
you're doing it.
I live within about an hour and a half of the coast here in Texas, but and I do maybe one saltwater fishing trip a year, but and I stay so busy with
Yeah.
the terrestrial wildlife, if you will, from with what we do we do a weekly TV. We actually do a weekly TV show. It's called A Sportsman's Life on Carbon TV that we do a fair amount of fishing on. And what I love about it is I do it with Jeff Rice and Luke Clayton, who I've been doing outdoor radio shows now with for 20 plus years. But the beauty of it is it's on Carbon TV and on YouTube. We go hunting or fishing this week. Jeff does a great job of putting together a program, and next week you get to see it, kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
so maybe people will get to see me do a little bit more fishing than what they realize I like to do.
Well, keep talking about that, because that's the last question I like you to I like to pose is, and I want you to be totally selfish for this moment. Where are all the places, whether it's your social media, TV channels, podcasts, where are all the places we can follow you, please?
Oh my gosh! Oh, well, I'm on Facebook with Larry Weishuhn. I'm on Instagram with Larry Weishuhn. There's also a Mr. Whitetail Weishuhn there. Mr. Whitetail is what that one is. Trying to think. I'm on LinkedIn with Larry Weishuhn. Uh, my website is www.larryweishuhn.net, and there you can probably access the TV shows, the podcast, the books that I do, and it's a place I do a lot of different blogs as well too on current and past hunts, and occasionally a little bit of equipment stuff, and try to tell a decent story every once in a while. Some interesting things that have happened over the years. So, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. The YouTube channel is A Sportsman's Life. We do it there as well too. So there's a lot of different places when you get right down to it that people can get in touch with me, and I'm very fortunate. I get tickled because years ago when I was at Texas A&M, I counseled a lot of students, and the time frame I was there, and these kids would come up to me, and I was just a grown kid at the time. And I said, "Why are you in wildlife?" And I love to hunt and fish. And I said, "Why are you in wildlife?" I said, "I don't like people." And I said, I grab them by the shoulder, lead them out of my office, and said, "Where we're going?" I said, "We're going to go change your major." I said, "What?" I said, "We're going to change your major because if you don't like people, you do definitely not need to be in wildlife." And because wildlife management, when you get right down to it, the wildlife, it's 99% people and probably 1% wildlife management. When really kind of get right down to the bones of it. So, you got to love people, and I'm very fortunate. I do a lot of talks, and I love doing those talks, and I love spending time with folks, and I love to get them telling me stories as well too. That's how I learn a lot of different things. To try different things, and I'm not averse to trying almost anything to see if it works. If it works for me, or that's great. If not, I learned, well, it doesn't work for me, kind of thing. But you got to love people when you're in this business. And again, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, the website, LarryWeishuhn.net, and I'm sure I'm missing some other places as well too. They can Google my name and no telling what'll show up.
I love it. Well, a lot of you already know Mr. Whitetail. Follow him, subscribe to his channel, do all the things. He is not just one of the best to ever do it, but he does it the right way, does it the ethical way. If you are a fan of anything I've done, he's had a massive impact on the diamond standard. I really would say he is the diamond standard. When I talk about the diamond standard at Diamond Outfitters, a lot of it comes from the philosophies, the trainings. When you have people in your life that do it the right way and are willing to put themselves out there and be a public figure like he is, in my career becoming a public figure, I've tried to mirror, a lot of what would Larry do in this situation, or how would he handle that situation, even with the difficult call sometimes with the client or something. I'm thinking, how would Larry handle this? So this is a really good guy to follow. If you like our channel, if you like what you've heard today on the secret side of Western big game hunting, like us, follow us, subscribe to us, do all those things, give us 5-star reviews, tell a friend. That's how we get our podcast out there. Larry, just an absolute honor to have you on. You guys check out all of his books, especially Deer Addictions. Listen to his podcast, DSC Campfire with Larry Weishuhn. Until next time, my friend, keep doing the heavy lifting, keep your standards high. We'll see you in the woods, and God bless you, my friend.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be with you.
The Secret Society of Western Big Game Hunting is brought to you by Zero Outfitter Fees and Diamond Outfitters. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.